My name is Anastasia Vasquez. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 3 weeks, I've been planning the complete destruction of everyone I've ever called family. But let me start at the beginning. Because this story, it has layers. Secrets buried under secrets, lies wrapped in bigger lies. And by the time I'm done telling you what really happened, you'll understand why some betrayals deserve more than forgiveness. You'll understand why they deserve complete annihilation. See that woman in the family photo behind me? The one with the warm smile and the world's best mom coffee mug? That's Patricia Vasquez, my mother. The woman who raised me to believe that my father was a deadbeat who abandoned us when I was 2 years old. Your father never wanted you, Anastasia, she'd whisper during my childhood tantrums. He walked out the door and never looked back. But don't worry, baby. Mommy will always be here. She'd hold me close, stroke my hair, and I'd cry into her shoulder, grateful for her love, ashamed of my father's rejection. For 27 years, I believed that story. For 27 years, I carried the weight of abandonment in my chest, like a stone. For 27 years, I lived with the quiet certainty that I wasn't good enough to keep my own father around. And for 27 years, my mother watched me suffer with that pain and said nothing. But 3 weeks ago, I found out the truth. And the truth? The truth is so much worse than I ever imagined. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. I was in my apartment in Denver, getting ready for work at the marketing firm where I'd been climbing the corporate ladder for the past 5 years. My phone rang with an unknown number from New Mexico. Is this Anastasia Vasquez? The voice was elderly, shaky. Yes, who is this? My name is Margaret Santos. I was your father's neighbor, Miguel Santos. The world stopped. My father's name was Miguel Santos. That much I knew. But hearing it spoken by a stranger, hearing it connected to the word was, past tense, made my legs give out. I'm sorry, Margaret continued, but Miguel passed away yesterday. Lung cancer. He talked about you constantly, every day for the past 2 years since he got sick. He kept saying he needed to see his Anastasia one more time. The phone slipped from my hand. Miguel Santos, my father, was dead, and he'd been looking for me. Miss, are you there? Margaret's voice crackled from the phone on the floor. I picked it up with trembling fingers. I'm here. There's something else. Miguel left instructions. If anything happened to him, I was supposed to call you. He said your family, your mother's family, they wouldn't let him contact you. But he kept every birthday card he bought you but couldn't send, every Christmas present, every letter he wrote but couldn't mail. My breath caught. What are you talking about? Honey, your father never abandoned you. He's been trying to reach you your entire life. The room spun. 27 years of believing I was unwanted, unloved, abandoned, and it was all a lie. I don't understand. He has boxes of things for you. Photos, letters, recordings. He recorded himself telling you stories every week just in case he ever got to see you again. And Miss Anastasia? There are legal documents. Court papers. It looks like your family. They did things. Blocked him legally. Changed addresses. I think you need to come here. That afternoon, I called in sick to work and drove 8 hours straight to Taos, New Mexico. Margaret Santos lived in a small adobe house with a garden full of sunflowers. She was exactly what I'd imagined, elderly, kind, with the sort of gentle eyes that held secrets and sorrows. But it was the man in the wheelchair on her porch who made me stop breathing. He looked exactly like me. Anastasia? His voice was barely a whisper. My God, you're so beautiful. This was not Margaret. This was not a neighbor. This was my father, Miguel Santos, alive, barely but alive. I thought. I couldn't speak. She said you were dead. Not yet, Misha, not yet. He reached for me with hands that shook from chemotherapy. But soon. That's why Margaret called the line. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't die without seeing your face. I fell to my knees beside his wheelchair, and for the first time in my adult life, I cried like a child. Why? I sobbed. Why didn't you ever try to find me? Miguel's eyes filled with a pain deeper than his cancer. Baby girl, I tried every day for 27 years. He wheeled himself inside, and I followed. The walls were covered with photos of me. School pictures my mother must have given to relatives, graduation photos from social media, professional headshots from my company website. There were birthday cards addressed to me but never sent, Christmas presents still wrapped, Letters with my name written in shaking handwriting. I kept trying to contact you, but your mother's family, they moved you away when you were little. Changed your last name from Santos to Vasquez, your mother's maiden name. Every time I found your new address, you'd be gone again. He showed me a shoebox full of court documents. Restraining orders filed against him. Restraining orders I'd never heard of. False allegations of domestic violence. Allegations that were later withdrawn but remained on record. Address change notifications that redirected my mail away from him and to a P.O. box I'd never seen. Your Uncle Carlos, Miguel said, pointing to a legal document. He's a lawyer. He helped your mother create a paper trail that made it look like I was dangerous. Every time I tried to get visitation rights, they'd file another complaint. Another restriction. My hands were shaking as I read through the papers. But why? Why would they do this? Miguel was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then he looked at me with eyes full of regret. Because I wouldn't give them money, Anastasia. When your mother left me, her family expected me to pay for their lifestyle. Not just child support. I would have paid that forever. They wanted me to pay for their houses, their cars, their vacations. When I said no, that my money should go to you, not to them. He gestured to the papers. This is what happened. I stayed with my father for 3 days. 3 days of stories I should have heard as a child. 3 days of jokes and songs and the kind of unconditional love I'd spent my whole life believing I didn't deserve. 3 days of learning that every birthday he couldn't celebrate with me, he'd sit alone and sing "Happy Birthday" to a photo of me. 3 days of discovering that the man I'd been taught to hate had spent his entire adult life loving me from a distance. On the 3rd day, my father died in his sleep. I held his hand as his breathing slowed, and the last thing he whispered was, "Tell them I forgive them, but make sure they know what they took from us." I buried my father in Taos, alone except for Margaret and a few of his neighbors who'd become his chosen family. My real family, my mother, my Uncle Carlos, my Aunt Maria, my cousins, they had no idea he was dead. They had no idea I'd found him. They had no idea I now knew the truth about everything. But they were about to find out. Because my father asked me to forgive them. But he never asked me to let them get away with it. And I'm my father's daughter, which means I keep my promises. All of them. I drove back to Denver in silence, my father's ashes in an urn on my passenger seat, and a plan forming in my mind like a storm gathering strength. See, here's what my family didn't know about me. I wasn't just some corporate marketing drone who'd spent her life quietly accepting their version of reality. I was good at my job. Really good. I'd built my career on understanding people's psychological triggers, on crafting messages that got inside people's heads and stayed there, on creating campaigns that exposed truths people didn't want to face. And now I was going to use every single one of those skills to destroy the people who'd stolen my father from me. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this conspiracy went. I spent the next week doing research. Real research. The kind that would make a private investigator proud. I started with my Uncle Carlos. He was a family lawyer with a practice in Albuquerque, specializing in, and this was rich, family law and child custody cases. His website talked about protecting families from dangerous situations and ensuring child safety above all else. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I dug into public records, court filings, and old newspaper archives. What I found made my stomach turn. Uncle Carlos hadn't just helped my mother fake evidence against my father. He'd been doing it for years. To other fathers. Other families. There were at least 6 other cases where Carlos had helped vindictive ex-wives fabricate domestic violence claims to win custody battles. Cases where fathers who fought back had their lives ruined, their reputations destroyed, their children turned against them forever. My father wasn't Carlos's only victim. He was just the one who never gave up trying. Then I looked into my Aunt Maria, my mother's sister and Carlos's wife. Maria ran a nonprofit organization called Safe Families Network that supposedly helped women and children escape domestic violence. Except when I cross-referenced her client list with Carlos's legal cases, I found something interesting. Nearly every woman who came to Maria's nonprofit for help ended up hiring Carlos as their lawyer. And nearly every one of their cases involved accusations against fathers who had money. Fathers who could be squeezed for massive settlements. Fathers who could be bled dry in legal fees and then discarded. My aunt and uncle weren't just helping my mother keep me from my father. They were running a scam, a legal con game that destroyed families for profit. And my mother? She wasn't just their client. She was their business partner. I found the financial records buried in LLC filings and tax documents. My mother had been receiving payments from Carlos's law firm for years, not as a client, as a consultant. Every time Carlos won a custody case, my mother got a cut. She'd been profiting off the system that kept me from my father. She'd been getting paid to make sure I believed I was abandoned. That night, I sat in my apartment with my father's ashes and made a decision. I was going to expose all of them, but not through the legal system. They'd gamed that already. Not through confrontation. They'd just lie and manipulate like they always had. I was going to destroy them the way they'd destroyed my father. Slowly. Systematically. And in full view of everyone who mattered to them. I was going to make them famous for all the wrong reasons. The first step was getting back into their lives. I called my mother on a Thursday evening, putting on the voice I'd perfected over the years. The grateful daughter who appreciated everything her family had done for her. Mom? It's Anastasia. I was thinking, it's been too long since we all got together. What do you think about having a big family dinner this weekend? My treat. I could hear the surprise in her voice. Anastasia, honey, that would be wonderful, but you don't need to pay for anything. I insist, Mom. I got a promotion at work, and I want to celebrate with the people who matter most to me. Another lie. But after 27 years of living with theirs, I figured I'd earned the right to tell a few of my own. I'll make reservations somewhere nice. Let's invite everyone. Uncle Carlos, Aunt Maria, the cousins. I want to see everyone. Oh, sweetheart, they'll be so excited. You know how proud we all are of you. Proud. They were proud of the daughter they'd systematically isolated from her father's love. Proud of the woman they'd created by convincing a little girl she wasn't worth staying for. I can't wait to see everyone, I said. There's so much I want to talk about. That was true, at least. Saturday night, I made reservations at Palazzo, the most expensive restaurant in Denver. Not because I wanted to treat them, but because Palazzo had something most restaurants didn't have. A private dining room with excellent acoustics and discreet recording equipment I'd arranged to have installed that afternoon. Everything they said was going to be documented. Everything they said was going to be used against them. I arrived early and set up my phone to record backup audio, just in case. Then, I sat at the head of the table and waited for my family to arrive. They came in laughing and talking, looking like the perfect family they'd always pretended to be. My mother, Patricia, in her favorite red dress, still beautiful at 52. Uncle Carlos, distinguished and silver-haired, the kind of man who commanded respect in courtrooms. Aunt Maria, elegant and soft-spoken, the face of compassion for her nonprofit. My cousins, Carlos Jr., who was becoming a lawyer like his father, and Sophia, who worked as a social worker with Maria's organization. They hugged me, told me how proud they were, asked about my job and my life. They were warm and loving, and everything a family should be. They were also everything I was about to destroy. I'm so glad we could all be together, I said as we sat down to dinner. There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. What's that, Mia? My mother asked. My father. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Anastasia, Uncle Carlos said carefully. You know that's a painful subject for your mother. Is it? I looked directly at my mother. Because I've been wondering, do you ever think about him? About Miguel? My mother's face went pale. Why would you bring him up? I don't know. I guess I've been curious. I mean, I'm almost 30 and I don't know anything about half of my DNA. Don't you think that's strange? There's nothing strange about it, Aunt Maria said quickly. Some people aren't meant to be parents. Some people abandon their responsibilities. Do they? I took a sip of wine. Or do some people just get painted that way? Cousin Sophia laughed nervously. Anastasia, you're being dramatic. Uncle Miguel left when you were a baby. End of story. Uncle Miguel. They called him Uncle Miguel, as if he were some distant relative instead of my father. as if he were someone who'd never mattered at all. You know, I said conversationally, I've been doing some genealogy research lately. It's amazing what you can find online these days. Carlos Jr. rolled his eyes. Are you going to start making us all take DNA tests? Oh, I don't need DNA tests. I smiled. I have something much better. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. I have the truth. And then I pressed play. My father's voice filled the private dining room, the voice I'd heard for 3 days, the voice that told me stories and sang me songs and whispered apologies for 27 years of absence. Anastasia, Mija, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you finally know what really happened. I want you to know that every day I didn't get to hold you was a day I died a little bit more inside. My mother's wine glass shattered in her hand. But I also want you to know that I forgive them. I forgive your mother for leaving me. I forgive Carlos for the legal games. I forgive Maria for helping them. I forgive all of them, because hate is a poison, and I don't want you to carry that poison in your heart. Uncle Carlos stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Anastasia, where did you get that? Sit down, Uncle Carlos. My voice was ice. We're just getting started. But he didn't sit down. None of them did. They were all standing now, looking at me like I was a bomb that might explode at any second. They were right. I was. You want to know where I got this? I stood up slowly. I got it from my father 3 weeks ago, right before he died of lung cancer, alone, in New Mexico, where he'd been living for the past 15 years, hoping every day that I might somehow find him. The silence was deafening. He's dead? My mother whispered. He's dead. I looked at each of them. And he died believing I hated him. He died thinking I'd chosen to stay away from him. He died not knowing that I spent my entire childhood crying myself to sleep because I thought my own father didn't want me. Tears were streaming down my mother's face now, but I wasn't done. Not even close. But before he died, he showed me something interesting. Uncle Carlos, you remember these, don't you? I pulled out the folder of legal documents and spread them across the table. Restraining orders based on false allegations. Address changes that were never authorized by me. Legal motions filed in my name without my knowledge or consent. Carlos's face was the color of ash. Anastasia, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I picked up one of the documents. I understand that you've been running a scam, using your law practice and Maria's nonprofit to destroy fathers and steal their children. I understand that my mother wasn't just your client, she was your business partner. I understand that you've been getting paid to ruin families for 27 years, and my father was just the first one you perfected the system on. Aunt Maria was backing toward the door. We were protecting you. From what? I slammed my hand on the table, and they all jumped. From a man who loved me? From a father who spent every birthday buying me presents he couldn't give me? From someone who recorded bedtime stories for a daughter he wasn't allowed to see? I was crying now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. Pure, concentrated rage that had been building for 3 weeks and was finally finding its target. You want to know what you were really protecting me from? I looked at my mother. You were protecting me from finding out that you're all sociopaths. You were protecting me from learning that the people I trusted most in the world spent my entire childhood lying to my face. You were protecting me from discovering that my own family cared more about money than they cared about my happiness. Anastasia, please. My mother reached for me. I stepped back. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. We can explain. Explain what? Explain how you let me spend 27 years believing I was abandoned? Explain how you watched me struggle with attachment issues and depression and never once thought to tell me the truth? Explain how you turned my father's love for me into a source of profit? I looked around the table at their faces, shocked, guilty, terrified. Good. They should be terrified. Here's what's going to happen, I said calmly. You're all going to sit down, you're all going to listen, and then you're all going to understand exactly how thoroughly I'm going to destroy you. They sat. They listened. And by the time I was done talking, they understood that the quiet, grateful daughter they thought they knew had died the day I held my father's hand and watched him slip away. What was left was something much more dangerous. What was left was someone who had nothing left to lose. The beauty of destroying someone in the digital age is that you don't need armies or weapons or even much money. You just need the truth and the right platform to tell it. I'd spent my entire career learning how to make content go viral, how to create messages that people couldn't ignore, how to build narratives that spread like wildfire through social media. Now, I was going to use every single one of those skills to burn my family's lives to the ground. But first, I needed to gather more evidence. See, that dinner at Palazzo wasn't just about confronting them. It was about getting them to reveal exactly how deep their conspiracy went. And, thanks to the recording equipment I'd installed and the backup audio on my phone, I had everything I needed. Over the course of that 2-hour dinner, my family had confessed to filing false domestic violence allegations against my father, forging my signature on legal documents when I was a minor, intercepting and destroying letters and gifts meant for me, moving me repeatedly to different addresses to avoid my father's attempts to contact me, using Uncle Carlos's law practice to run similar scams on at least 6 other families, splitting the profits from their consultations with vindictive ex-wives, coaching mothers to fabricate evidence against their children's fathers. They'd also revealed something I hadn't expected. My cousin Sophia, who worked with Aunt Maria at the Safe Families Network, had been helping them identify potential targets. Women with wealthy ex-husbands who could be convinced to file false claims in exchange for guaranteed custody and massive financial settlements. My entire family wasn't just guilty of destroying my relationship with my father. They were running a criminal enterprise that had been tearing apart families for decades, and I had all of it on audio. But audio recordings weren't enough. Not for what I had planned. I needed visual evidence. I needed documents. I needed proof that would be impossible to deny or explain away. So I did something my family never expected. I got a job with them. It started with a phone call to Aunt Maria on Monday morning. "Aunt Maria, it's Anastasia. I've been thinking about what happened at dinner, and I think you're right. I think I've been naive about my father. I think maybe I needed to hear the truth, even if it hurt." I could hear the relief in her voice. "Oh, Anastasia, I'm so glad you called. We were all so worried. I want to understand better. Your work at the Safe Families Network, Uncle Carlos's legal practice. Maybe I've been too sheltered from how ugly these custody battles can get." "You have been, sweetie. But that's not your fault. We wanted to protect you from all of that." "Well, I don't want to be protected anymore. I want to help." There was a pause. "Help how?" "I'm good at marketing, at social media, at getting messages out to the right people. What if I volunteered to help with your nonprofit? To help you reach more women who need your services?" "Anastasia, that would be wonderful. But are you sure you're ready for this kind of work? Some of these stories are very difficult to hear." If only she knew how difficult. "I'm sure. In fact, I think it might be exactly what I need. To understand what you all went through with my father, to see how you protect other families from going through the same thing." 3 days later, I was sitting in the Safe Families Network office with access to their client files, their financial records, and their communications with Uncle Carlos's law firm. It was like being given the keys to a criminal empire. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. I photographed client files that showed the pattern of false allegations. I recorded conversations between Maria and Carlos about upcoming cases. I copied financial records that proved the profit-sharing arrangement. I even got Sophia to admit on camera that she'd been coached to identify high-value targets, women whose ex-husbands had significant assets that could be seized through legal action. But the most damning evidence came from my mother's own mouth. See, Patricia thought I'd been sufficiently traumatized by learning about my father's abandonment that I'd never question their version of events again. She thought I was back under their control, back to being the grateful daughter who did what she was told. So when I asked her to tell me more about what had really happened with my father, she didn't just tell me. She bragged about it. "You have to understand, Anastasia. Miguel was being unreasonable. We needed that money for your future, for the family's stability. He was being selfish, wanting to keep everything for himself." We were sitting in her living room, and I was recording everything on my phone. But the restraining orders, the domestic violence allegations, those were necessary. She said it like she was talking about buying groceries. Carlos explained that the courts respond to documentation. If we wanted to protect you, we needed to create a paper trail that showed Miguel was dangerous. But he wasn't dangerous. He was dangerous to our plans. She looked at me like I was being deliberately dense. Anastasia, do you have any idea how much money Carlos's law firm has made over the years? How many women we've helped secure their futures? This isn't just about one man or one family. This is about a system that works. A system that separates children from their fathers. A system that gives women power. Her voice was getting heated now. Do you know what it's like to be trapped with a man who won't give you what you need? To have children with someone who thinks his money is more important than your security? But Dad would have paid child support. Child support? She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. Anastasia, child support is nothing. A few $100s a month? That's pocket change. What we created was a way to get everything. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, the business assets, everything. I stared at her. You're talking about stealing. I'm talking about survival. She leaned forward. And it worked, didn't it? You had a good childhood. You went to good schools. You had opportunities. You think that would have happened if we'd let Miguel keep his money and just sent us a check every month? I think I would have had a father. You had something better. You had a family that fought for you. That's when I knew there was no redemption for any of them. They weren't just criminals. They were criminals who believed their own justifications. They had convinced themselves that destroying my father was an act of love. They had convinced themselves that stealing from families was a form of justice. They had convinced themselves that lying to me for 27 years was protection, and they would never, ever admit they were wrong, which meant it was time to show them what real consequences looked like. I spent the next week creating what would become the most viral social media campaign of my career. Not because I was trying to promote a product or a brand, but because I was trying to promote the truth. I started with a simple TikTok video. Just me, sitting in my apartment, holding my father's ashes. My name is Anastasia Vasquez. 3 weeks ago, I found out that everything I'd been told about my father was a lie. I told the story simply, clearly, with the kind of emotional authenticity that social media algorithms love. I talked about growing up believing I was abandoned. I talked about finding my father dying in New Mexico. I talked about the legal documents that proved my family had systematically kept us apart. But I didn't just tell my story. I made it clear that my story wasn't unique. If this happened to me, it's happening to other people. Right now, today, there are children who think their fathers don't love them because someone is making money by keeping them apart. The video got 1 million views in 24 hours. But that was just the beginning. I followed up with a series of videos that exposed the entire scam. Videos that showed the legal documents. Videos that played audio recordings of my family confessing to their crimes. Videos that named names and showed faces and provided evidence that couldn't be denied. I created a website called Stolen Fathers where other victims could share their stories. I started a hashtag, Stolen Fathers. I reached out to journalists, to podcasters, to anyone with a platform who might be interested in investigating family court corruption. Within a week, my family's faces were everywhere. Local news stations picked up the story. True crime podcasters started doing deep dives into Uncle Carlos's legal cases. Other victims started coming forward with their own stories of being separated from their children through false allegations. The Safe Families Network lost their nonprofit status when their real financial records came to light. Uncle Carlos's law firm was under investigation by the State Bar Association. Aunt Maria was facing charges for fraud and conspiracy. My cousins were trying to distance themselves from their parents' criminal activities. And my mother? My mother was learning what it felt like to be abandoned, because every single person who had ever mattered to her was walking away. Her friends, her coworkers, her extended family, everyone was looking at her like she was a monster. Which, it turned out, she was. But the best part wasn't watching their public humiliation. The best part wasn't seeing them lose their jobs and their reputations and their freedom. The best part was the phone call I got from a lawyer in Albuquerque. Miss Vasquez? My name is David Chen. I represent several fathers who believe they were victims of your uncle's fraud. We'd like to file a class action lawsuit, and we'd like you to be our star witness. How many fathers? So far, 14, but we think there might be more. 14 fathers. 14 men who had been separated from their children. 14 families that had been destroyed for profit. And that was just the beginning. Mr. Chen, I said, I'll testify. I'll do whatever you need me to do. There's one more thing. The lawsuit isn't just about damages. We're asking for criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering. Your family could be looking at serious prison time. I thought about my father, dying alone in New Mexico. I thought about all the other fathers who had died without ever seeing their children again. I thought about all the children who had grown up believing they were unloved. Good, I said. There is one complication. Your mother has been trying to contact you. She says she wants to make amends, that she's willing to cooperate with the investigation if you'll speak to her. I almost laughed. After 27 years of lies, she wanted to make amends. After destroying my father and countless other families, she wanted to cooperate. After getting caught red-handed running a criminal enterprise, she wanted to negotiate. Tell my mother, I said, that if she wants to make amends, she can start by confessing everything to the police. Without a lawyer present, without any deals or agreements or conditions. And if she does that, then maybe I'll consider letting her see her granddaughter someday. There was a pause. You have a daughter? No, I said. But she doesn't know that. And now she'll spend the rest of her life wondering what other secrets I'm keeping from her. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment and looked my father's ashes. I kept my promise, Dad, I whispered. I forgave them. And I had. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people escape consequences. Forgiveness means letting go of the anger that's eating you alive. I had forgiven my family for what they did to me, but I was going to make sure they paid for what they did to everyone else. Because that's what justice looks like. And sometimes, justice looks exactly like revenge. 6 months later, I was sitting in a federal courthouse watching my family's lives end. Not literally, of course. They were all still breathing, still technically alive. But everything that had made them who they were, their reputations, their careers, their freedom, their relationships, all of that was dying in front of a jury of 12 people who looked at them like they were something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. The trial had been everything I'd hoped for and more. The prosecution had built their case methodically and using the evidence I'd gathered to show exactly how Uncle Carlos, Aunt Maria, my mother, and even Cousin Sophia had operated their criminal enterprise. 14 fathers testified about losing their children. 23 children, now adults, testified about growing up believing they were abandoned. Financial experts testified about the millions of dollars that had been stolen through fraudulent legal settlements. And I testified about my father. I told the jury about Miguel Santos, who had worked construction for 30 years and saved every penny he could for his daughter's future. I told them about a man who recorded bedtime stories for a child he wasn't allowed to see. I told them about someone who died believing his own daughter hated him. I told them about the last words he'd whispered to me. Tell them I forgive them. But make sure they know what they took from us. By the time I finished testifying, half the jury was crying. But the most powerful testimony didn't come from me. It came from someone I'd never expected to see. Marcus Williams had been Uncle Carlos's first victim, 30 years ago. His ex-wife had used the same playbook that would later be used against my father. False allegations, forged documents, systematic alienation from his children. Marcus had spent 3 decades trying to prove his innocence, trying to reconnect with his kids, trying to rebuild his life after losing everything. His children were adults now, and they'd finally learned the truth about what had really happened to their family. Your Honor, Marcus said from the witness stand, I want the court to understand what these people took from me. They didn't just take my money or my reputation. They took my children's childhood. They took 30 years of birthdays and Christmas mornings and school plays and graduation ceremonies. They took bedtime stories and homework help and father-daughter dances. His voice broke. My daughter got married last year. She called me 3 days before the wedding to ask if I wanted to walk her down the aisle. 30 years after these people convinced her I didn't love her, she called to invite me to the most important day of her life. He looked directly at my family's defense table. I walked her down that aisle, and she was beautiful, and I was proud. But for 30 years, I thought I'd never see that day. For 30 years, I believed my children hated me, and they believed I'd abandoned them. Marcus turned to face the jury. These people didn't just commit fraud, they committed murder. They murdered relationships. They murdered childhoods. They murdered love itself. And they did it for money. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Uncle Carlos's wife sobbing. When the prosecution rested their case, the defense tried to argue that my family had been helping vulnerable women, and that their methods, while unorthodox, were meant to protect children. They tried to paint my father as an abusive man who had deserved to lose his parental rights. They tried to suggest that I was a disgruntled daughter seeking revenge rather than justice. But you can't argue with evidence. You can't explain away 30 years of documented fraud. You can't justify destroying families for profit. And you can't convince a jury that 23 children were better off believing they were unloved than knowing they had fathers who fought for them every day. The verdict came back in less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Uncle Carlos, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and practicing law under false pretenses. 25 years in federal prison. Aunt Maria, conspiracy, fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise under the guise of a nonprofit. 15 years in federal prison. My mother, conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. 10 years in federal prison. Cousin Sophia, conspiracy and fraud. 5 years in federal prison, 3 years suspended. Cousin Carlos Jr. was cleared of criminal charges but lost his license to practice law. As the judge read the sentences, I felt something I hadn't expected. Sadness. Not for them. They deserved everything they got. But for all the time that had been lost, all the families that had been destroyed, all the children who had grown up believing they were unwanted. After the trial, I walked outside into the Denver sunshine and called Margaret Santos. It's over, I told her. They're all going to prison. How do you feel? She asked. Empty, I said honestly. I thought I'd feel vindicated or satisfied or something. But I just feel empty. That's normal, Misha. Revenge doesn't fill the hole that loss creates. It just makes sure the people who created the hole can't hurt anyone else. She was right. Nothing was going to bring my father back. Nothing was going to give me the childhood I should have had. Nothing was going to erase 27 years of believing I was abandoned. But at least now, other children wouldn't have to go through what I went through. At least now, other fathers wouldn't die alone, wondering why their children hated them. At least now, the truth was out there for everyone to see. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I sat beside his grave and told him everything that had happened. I kept my promise, Dad. I forgave them, but I made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves on the trees around us. I wish things had been different. I wish I'd found you sooner. I wish we'd had more time. I pulled out my phone and played one of his recorded bedtime stories, the one about a princess who had to save herself because no one else was coming to rescue her. Once upon a time, my father's voice said, there was a beautiful princess who lived in a tower. She waited and waited for someone to save her, but no one came, so she saved herself. And when she got out of that tower, she made sure no other princess would ever be trapped there again. As his voice faded, I realized something. I wasn't empty. I was free. For the first time in my life, I was completely, totally free. Free from the lies I'd been told. Free from the family that had never really loved me. Free from the pain of believing I wasn't worth staying for. Free to build a life based on truth instead of manipulation. Free to love people who actually deserved it. Free to be the person my father had always believed I could be. I stood up and brushed the dirt off my knees. I'm going to be okay, Dad. Better than okay. I'm going to be happy. I walked back to my car and drove home, leaving my family's graves behind me. Not literally. They weren't dead, but they were dead to me. And sometimes that's the only justice you can get. 3 years later, I was in my new apartment in Portland, Oregon, editing a documentary about family court corruption when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard a familiar voice. Anastasia? This is your mother. I hadn't spoken to Patricia in 3 years. Not since the trial. Not since she'd been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. What do you want? I asked. I'm being released early. Good behavior. I was hoping we could talk. About what? About making things right, about being a family again. I almost laughed. Patricia, I said. I couldn't call her mom anymore. We were never a family. A family doesn't lie to each other for 30 years. A family doesn't destroy each other for money. A family doesn't steal children from their fathers. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. For 30 years, you chose money over truth. You chose control over love. You chose to hurt me rather than lose your power over me. I want to make amends. Then make them to someone who cares. Make them to the other families you destroyed. Make them to the children who grew up thinking they were abandoned. Make them to my father's grave. Anastasia, please. I'm not your daughter anymore, Patricia. I'm not your victim anymore. I'm not your anything anymore. And if you ever contact me again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. I hung up. Then I went back to editing my documentary. Because the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. The best revenge is building a life so good that their absence becomes a gift. The best revenge is becoming so happy that their attempts to hurt you become irrelevant. The best revenge is living well. And I was living very, very well. That night I called Margaret Santos. How are you doing, Misha? She asked. I'm good, I said. Really good. I'm working on a documentary about family court corruption. I'm seeing someone, a good man who actually loves me. I'm thinking about getting a dog. Your father would be so proud of you. I know he would. What else? I smiled. I'm thinking about having children someday. And when I do, I'm going to tell them stories about their grandfather, about a man who loved them before they were even born, about a man who never gave up, even when everything was stacked against him. That's beautiful, Anastasia. And I'm going to make sure they know that love doesn't abandon you. People abandon you. But love, real love, that stays forever, even when the person who gave it to you is gone. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and looked at the photo of my father that I kept on my desk. Miguel Santos, smiling at the camera, holding a birthday card he'd never been able to give me. I love you, Dad, I whispered. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, I could almost hear him whisper back. I love you too, Mija, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become. The woman who saved herself. The woman who made sure no other princess would ever be trapped in that tower. The woman who turned her pain into purpose and her rage into justice. The woman who learned that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose for yourself. And sometimes the best revenge is simply living long enough to see your enemies destroy themselves. Which is exactly what mine had done. And exactly what they deserved. But that's not the end of the story. Because 3 months after Patricia's phone call, I got a letter. Not from her, but from someone else. Someone whose name I didn't recognize, but whose story I knew by heart. Dear Anastasia, the letter began. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm Marcus Williams' daughter, the one who got married 3 years ago. I wanted to thank you for giving me back my father. I cried reading that letter. I cried because Sarah Chen got to walk down the aisle with her father. I cried because Marcus Williams got to see his daughter get married. I cried because somewhere, somehow, my father's death had meaning. It had saved other families. It had reunited other children with their fathers. It had stopped other people from going through what we went through. And in the end, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. So here's what I learned about revenge. It's not about making people suffer. It's not about getting even. It's not about inflicting pain on the people who hurt you. Real revenge is about making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Real revenge is about turning your pain into purpose. Real revenge is about building something beautiful from the ashes of what they destroyed. My family took my father away from me. But in fighting to expose their crimes, I found dozens of other fathers who had been stolen from their children. I found dozens of other children who had been lied to about their parents. I found dozens of other families who had been destroyed for profit. And I helped bring them back together. I helped reunite children with their fathers. I helped expose a system that was designed to destroy families. I helped make sure that what happened to me would never happen to anyone else. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's love. That's the best way to honor someone who died believing they were forgotten. My father died thinking I hated him. But because of his death, 23 other children learned that their fathers never stopped loving them. Because of his death, 14 other fathers got to see their children again. Because of his death, a corrupt system was exposed and dismantled. Because of his death, hundreds of other families were saved. Miguel Santos didn't die in vain. He died as a hero. And every day, I try to live in a way that makes his sacrifice worthwhile. I try to be the daughter he always believed I could be. I try to build the life he always wanted me to have. I try to love the way he loved me, completely, unconditionally, forever. And I try to remember that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let the people who hurt you turn you into someone like them. My family were criminals and liars and manipulators, but I am not. I am my father's daughter. And that's the only family I need. But there's one more thing you need to know. One more secret that I've been keeping. Remember when I told you that my father whispered something to me as he was dying? Tell them I forgive them. But make sure they know what they took from us. I told you that's what he said, but I lied. What he actually said was much simpler, much more devastating. What he actually said was, I never stopped loving you, Anastasia, not for a single day, and I never will. Those were his last words. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just love. Pure, unconditional, eternal love. The kind of love that transcends death, the kind of love that survives betrayal. The kind of love that makes you fight for justice even when you know it won't bring back what you've lost. I never told my family that my father forgave them. Because he didn't. He didn't need to. Forgiveness is for the living. Love is forever. And the love between a father and daughter, that's the one thing no one can steal. No matter how hard they try, no matter how many lies they tell, no matter how much money they make, love wins. Love always wins. And that's the truth about revenge. Sometimes the best revenge is simply remembering that you were loved. Completely. Unconditionally. Forever. Even when the person who loved you is gone. Even when the world tells you that love doesn't exist. Even when everyone you trust turns out to be a liar. Love wins. And that's the only truth that matters. That's the only justice that counts. That's the only revenge worth taking. The revenge of a life lived in love. The revenge of a heart that refuses to turn cold. The revenge of a daughter who carries her father's love with her everywhere she goes. Forever.